I'm sure anybody who just tuned in saw me talking and acting like they can't hear me, and they're probably like, "Oh God, what's wrong with the sound here?"
Or they just assume you talk to yourself.
Could be. I kind of do though. I have my stream of consciousness that it doesn't always stay internal. I like the sound of my voice too much.
That's all of us. I was about to say that's all of us.
I also got some stuff in here about, not just Dallas, which we can or can't go into. I don't really care, but the Don Garber quotes from this week.
Mm-hmm.
So if we wanted to go over 45, we could, and we would have no problem having that discussion, especially with the chat.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think we're a little overloaded for 45 minutes.
Once we get down to that in the notes where it's like, we are in the market, that's probably, I'd be fine cutting it off with that.
We are in the market. There we go. Cutting it off anywhere there and under.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah, let's just stick to 45 today. Although it is tempting to talk about that Garber stuff, but because it may not be news next week.
It's one of those like they have those moments where Garber gives his state of the league type things. That's what the All-Star game is always one of those moments. If you're mentioned back to expansion times for us, we were always checking out those to see when he'd be talking about expansion.
Yeah, and that was a big one he announced too. Maybe we need to make time for it. Maybe we'll do like a short wind down.
Every time we think 30. We're getting out, right? Every time we think we're getting out a little bit, we get pulled back in by our own volition.
I know, exactly. I forget. Let me close my door real quick. I'll be right back.
All right. Odds on the speculation, Abo. 1 to 2 moves. That's a.
Yeah.
I don't know if I would say there's like 50-50, 60-40, but I would say it's one of those things where if the player they're targeting is available for the price that they are able to pay, then we'll probably see something happen. And if you just think about it without having known, if I hadn't even have sent that out and you were to be asked what position would we most likely be looking at if we were still looking at a position, I think 90% of the fan base would say left back, just for where we sit for help right now. With as exciting as Jay Reed is, we've only seen him a few games and he hasn't really had that much of an opportunity to go as a left back because he's been asked to play like a left center back, all these different things with Marcanic in front of him. It's just been kind of weird the past few games.
Are we 2/3 of the way through the season?
Yeah.
I thought so.
Actually, over 2/3 of the way through.
Is it 3/4? Should I say 3/4?
I'd say 2/3 is closer. Yeah. Because we're 25 games in out of 34. 9 games left. It's like right in between, like 70% maybe.
Cool. All right. Well, I think I'm ready. I'm going to hit record. You ready?
Yeah, let's do it.
Cool. Welcome, everyone, to Flyover Footy on the Big 550 KTRS. We are presented by Noble Ice Vineyards. Thank you, everyone, for joining us tonight. It's a strange part of the season. I know I've been out of town for 2 weeks. We have the All-Star break. I know we all just very much enjoyed the Euros, maybe sort of enjoyed Copa America. And we're about to take a break from MLS regular season play. And Matt Baker is here, of course. I'm Phil Grooms. And I think we're going to just kind of talk about the fun stuff. And there's a lot to talk about with City because there are a lot of player acquisitions. We can talk about what the team is even going to look like. We have, obviously, an interim coach who's only had a few games to kind of get his feet under him with different ways of playing. So, Matt, we've got a lot to talk about tonight as we transition and maybe even take a gasp of air, a bit of a break here.
Yeah, and the reason why we're taking a bit of a break, so to speak, when City has a match this coming weekend, I'm sure most of our listeners are familiar. If not, I'd like to read a quick statement that we put out on Twitter just to frame not just this episode, but a lot of our coverage going forward, because I'm not quite sure, but you might not hear a fallout this weekend. There might be a lack of an episode here or there. But the reason why the next month will be a step back for us, a lot, I think I speak for most all of our hosts here. We're not going to be buying tickets, really talking about the Leagues Cup tournament itself, or using any of those hashtags that they have on social media, trying not to give visibility to the tournament in this particular year. We released an episode earlier this week, has been an interview with Matt Seebeck, the Chief Experience Officer for St. Louis City, who was gracious enough to sit down with me and chat not just about what the club's plans are for this break in MLS regular season action, what they're doing for Leagues Cup to make it special and why they're doing it, but also to have some of these discussions about the Open Cup and the Leagues Cup and the impact of the supporter boycott and what the club's feelings are behind that and how they're handling it, but also backstory and background around what the club did or didn't do in relation to why they didn't participate in the US Open Cup, but are participating in Leagues Cup, having had the league cite fixture congestion as a reason for the Open Cup drama. We appreciate on Flyover Footy the rock and hard place that the club is in. We think that the All for City fan base, the St. Louis City fan base, can appreciate the reasons why we and others will have limited or no coverage of Leagues Cup as a result of MLS's decision to sacrifice their 100% participation and really required participation by U.S. soccer bylaws for the U.S. Open Cup in 2024. We still want to talk about the players themselves. Results are going to be secondary for us for Leagues Cup, and that is controversial depending on who you are. I understand that. We'll continue to an extent some of our previews, maybe recaps, and look at the players themselves and what happened either on the field or maybe what's going on in the locker room as much as we can tell from press conferences. We'll still look at Cedric Teuchert's acclimation into our system past Sporting KC. We're still going to look at Jake Girdwood-Reich's time fitting into the depth chart, conversations we'll have tonight about center backs, center defensive mid, and what that might look like. And of course, Marcel Hartl's first matches, and really anything else that impacts the club in preparation for the MLS season to resume on the other side of this tournament. I've called it before glorified exhibition matches, so depending on if it's one or two of us for the next month or so, we're still going to have some content during this break. We're going to keep the focus where we think it should be, on St. Louis City, on our players, on the people who wear and support the crest. This is partly driven by club statements from St. Louis City and what you heard from Matt Seebeck on our show this week, the work that they've done in facilitating conversations between St. Louis City supporter groups and MLS front office. Nelson Rodriguez, executive VP from MLS, had conversations with our supporter groups, ensuring that they know we want St. Louis to be a part of the Open Cup going forward, and we want the Open Cup to be honored and supported as it should be as the domestic cup for the United States, and that it is not sacrificed anymore for this month-long spectacle that is Leagues Cup. The work is not done, and we have no confirmation that St. Louis will return to its rightful place in the U.S. Open Cup, having a team of some kind to support and carry on the tradition, which is ultimately why we're taking this step back and why tonight you aren't really going to hear much about FC Dallas. You're not going to hear much about that preview and the matchup itself. We've played them before. You all know exactly what to expect with FC Dallas, but our focus tonight and going forward for the next month or so is mostly going to be on St. Louis, the players, the state of St. Louis City itself going into this break from MLS regular season play.
Yeah, I want to reiterate too, like Matt Seebeck coming in on the podcast and talking to you, Matt. I thought you did a great job. That, his candor, he was willing to talk about everything, and he did talk about everything that we asked him. And I think it's pretty clear now. I think he, as a representative of the club, he made it extremely clear that St. Louis wants to be in it next year, and that made me feel very confident and happy that I don't have to doubt my club's intentions or that they're trying to mess up any form of soccer in this country on their own, at least, that they were just kind of caught between a rock and a hard place, as you guys said, and you said today. But, at the same time, we are caught between a rock and a hard place as a podcast because we do care so much about the Open Cup. And as you said, Matt, no announcement has been made about whether or not teams will all be in or partial be in, or even just St. Louis City for sure being, in the Open Cup next year. And so, unfortunately, I think we all care about that enough, and we can't just take them at their word, as cynically as MLS handled not being in the Open Cup, making sure news was dropped in a way that for minimal reaction from fans and supporter groups. I think we just cannot cover Leagues Cup unless some kind of announcement was made. And Garber talked. He gave his state of the league kind of speech last night that we might cover in the wind down tonight. And so until that happens, I think unfortunately we also feel like we can't put any time and effort into a tournament that was used as an excuse to not play in the Open Cup. So just kind of reiterating some of those things, Matt, and wanted to make sure people heard that I back you and I feel the same way about it as well.
Yeah, and in full disclosure, I don't know what the next few weeks hold. I think I've had conversations this week from fans and others that I've seen conversations on the social media, on Facebook, on X and things, that it goes back and forth right now in not supporting the players and the new players, especially by this boycott and how that's going to make them feel. And I just want to reiterate that these are professional soccer players coming in to play for us. Cedric Teuchert and Marcel Hartl in particular have a lot of experience in Germany. They have a lot of experience playing in front of the fans and that culture, the 50+1 culture out there that honors fan support, fan ownership of teams to an extent that it's really hard to describe and you can't put in US sports terms. And they know the value that fans place on these kinds of culturally important things to the game. And so when it comes to the new players are not going to get the kind of experience that St. Louis has been known for when it comes to supporting St. Louis City, it's not going to take long for the players to be told what's going on. Our existing players know what's going on. They're not dumb. They're not social media dark. The word has gotten out, word gets out. And so this is not a secret on what's going to happen on Saturday with no drums, no less flags, all of this stuff. The noise in general in the rest of the stadium, it may be great and exactly what it was, but especially when Teuchert and Hartl have these conversations with the players like Roman Berkey, Tim Parker, Edu Leuven, Joachim Nilsson, the guys that they knew and know from Germany, they're friends, it's going to be understood. There's not going to be any ramifications from a player respect of fans front. That I want to get that out in front of everybody who's listening to this right away, because that's important to me. That when I hear comments about it feels like the fans and the supporters are letting the players down, the players fully respect these kinds of decisions. They understand the nuances, and in some ways, to be quite honest, they don't understand the business aspect that is MLS. Yeah. When Michael
Try
Wenzel,
and tell a German fan, anyone in Germany that likes soccer, what's going on here, and they'll be like, we would never stand for this,
And part of it, I've had this conversation on Flyover before, that part of it is just the history of the sport in America has evolved and developed soccer differently than the rest of the world, just because it hasn't been the predominant sport for 100 years. Right. And so in order to get it where it is, you've had to go through some of these business routes. You've had to go the single entity. You've had to take some of these kind of, not, the words escape me right now, but it's almost compromises. You have to take these compromises to grow the game to where it is. And the game is in a good place in America. The game has gotten to a good place. We have healthy competition in a lot of different leagues, a lot of different levels of the pyramid. But something that Michael Wenzel told me, and Jen Cease from Y98 a few weeks ago when he was first signed, is we were asking him about differences between City 2 and City, and he was almost miffed in how things were set up here versus in Germany, where when you were signed to the organization. Your reserve team was the U23 team, basically. And the restrictions in whether you could play for that reserve team and then come up and be called up if necessary in a pinch, an injury issue, it was a non-starter. It was almost like, oh yeah, we'll just draw from our U23s until we get these guys healthy, and then they'll go back down. Here, you have to go through the hoops of short-term loan agreements. You have to sign a contract if you've been up for and playing for more than 2 games. It was all a foreign concept to Wenzel. And I bring that up to illustrate the fact that, especially a lot of the players for our team who have come from abroad, and even the ones who they're familiar, they grew up with the sport in America and they know the background, it's just, it's second nature to them in different ways. They're not going to have an issue with players having some kind of show of a boycott or a stance based on the issues that they're trying to support.
Yeah. And last thing I want to say is that, if you're watching this and you don't even know what we're talking about, totally fine. Someone who feels that way or might be confused about why we're so upset about the Open Cup, and why we're not covering Leagues Cup or going to those games, please do what you're going to do. This is very inside baseball, and it's very much, soccer nerd kind of stuff. And I do think most of our fans kind of fall into that category, but I don't want anyone to come in here thinking we're telling everyone what to do, or, going to look down on anyone that goes to the games. Do your thing. We just want to get across to you how important we find the Open Cup in the history of soccer in St. Louis, and how much tied together they are, and how new this other side of soccer is, that the United States has been doing in MLS. And so anyway, I just wanted to make sure everybody feels welcome and comfortable, and there's no judgment here. In fact, you guys might think we're crazy for not going to those games, and it's, you might be right. You might be right.
Well, and too, Phil, thank you for saying that, because this is not like you're crossing a picket line.
Yes.
It is not to that extent to where there will be people with signs out front of City Park judging you if you decide to go to a game. Quite the opposite. One of the things the club is doing, to their credit, is trying to make the environment different. The players are going to enter like a college game day atmosphere, like Seebeck said. Cool stuff. You could go see it without supporting Leagues Cup, I suppose. If you don't buy a ticket, you could still go to Lou Fuse Plaza and see the festivities. And you buying Leagues ticket as an individual fan have nothing to feel bad about. I've never been one to judge how other fans choose to support, from the standing versus sitting conversation all the way up to this, where how you want to support your team and how you want to manifest that, and the lines that you want to draw or not draw, entirely personal decision. I even threw out the Leagues Cup roster on Twitter today because I thought it was important information to have out there for the fans who also want to continue following this as closely as they do during the regular season, during Leagues Cup, and because it impacts the players itself. There's no clear-cut line here of I'm going to turn my brain off of St. Louis City. I'm not going to think about them for the next four weeks, versus I'm still all in. The shades of gray are all over the place. Do what you'd like to do. If you want to know more about the US Open Cup, reasons that we're doing this, DMs are open. Let us know. Tag us on socials, because I'm happy to have that conversation publicly or privately. And ultimately, just do whatever makes you feel happy, and how you want to conduct yourself during this Leagues Cup.
Yep. Truly, next year, I think all of this is going to be worked out, and I will very much look forward to the Leagues Cup.
I really hope so, because I like the concept of the tournament. I've said this before, that last year I was all in on it. I caught Messi fever. I wish we had done better, and it was a fun tournament to get involved in. It's the politics of it all that's going on. So next year, I do hope to be back into this in full.
Absolutely. All right. Well, that's our intro, everybody. You're listening to Flyover Footy on the Big 550 KTRS. We have a lot more to talk about. As Matt said, we are still going to kind of keep you updated on the players and what's going on, as if, we always have constantly who is on the roster, what category do they fall in, and what formation do you think we would play in if we were to play a game tomorrow. So nothing is changing here. We are constantly thinking about this, and we're going to keep you updated on that. And let's start right now with injury updates. Matt, what do you got?
Let's go with the bad first. Joachim Nilsson, still no timetable. He's still out with his re-aggravation of the hamstring injury after the Seattle game last week. There's no time frame on his return. Indiana Vasilev, who did not play this past weekend against SKC, unfortunately missed the first game in his City career. I just hope they find a better mask for him, because that was the issue. He had his mask. He could have played. There was concerns about re-injuring or getting hit slightly and then having to sub back out because his nose was bleeding, or making him go into concussion protocol. But ultimately, he couldn't see through the mask, and that was his big concern. So he has a broken nose, suffered a broken nose last week. And so if he can get a mask that fits him, and I have no doubt that City Resources have figured that out. I expect to see Indiana Vasilev return to the field this coming Saturday. Guys who won't return but are progressing, Klaus and Rasmus Alm. Klaus was running outside solo at training on Tuesday. He had an MCL sprain. He was the second one, and he suffered this injury on June 26th-ish at training. It was that week around June 26th. The MCL sprain with a 6 to 8 week timeline puts him at about 4 weeks from the injury as of right now. This recording on July 25th, if you're listening to it on the 26th, 27th, he's about 4 weeks out. So his recovery, I would try to put at after Leagues Cup. I think getting him on the field during Leagues Cup, he's starting with the straight line running. He's going to progress to lateral movements, and then he'll be given the all clear to rejoin the team and work his fitness back up. That's the timeline. If you want to glimpse into what's ahead for him, you look at Rasmus Alm. Rasmus Alm has progressed to lateral movements. July 9th was the first time he began straight line running. And so you're seeing about 2 weeks or so from the straight line running to the lateral movements, as far as we can see in watching training. Rasmus Alm's MCL sprain was sustained on the 6-1 game at Miami. And so if you say the injury was on 6-1, he was straight line running on July 9th. Even Klaus is a little bit ahead of schedule from what Rasmus Alm was, about a week or so. And so Rasmus Alm's 6 to 8 week timeline puts him at about 8 weeks as of this weekend. So Rasmus Alm progressing. Hopefully he will be available, work his fitness up during this break, and we get him back available for the roster on the other side of Leagues Cup, or whatever happens in this tournament, maybe in 3 weeks or so. That's what I hope to see from Alm. Klaus a little bit behind. Indy just needs to try to find his mask. And that's kind of it for the injuries. It doesn't seem like a whole lot. It's definitely rounding better, other than the fact that Saliu and Ostraker are still out for the season.
Yeah, and if you've been listening to our show for the last 6-8 weeks, our conversations about Klaus have been really interesting, and we're about to jump into talking about some of the new players coming in. And, I think one of the biggest things we've been talking about with Klaus is, of course, he's not performing like he did last season, but we've been talking about him kind of pulling double duty with playmaking and just trying to score. And I think that's about to change, Matt. Don't you agree?
Wholeheartedly.
And so I think maybe we can start diving into Cedric Teukert as one of the players that'll help him do that, as just one of several players that are going to help him do that moving forward. But let's start with Cedric.
Cedric Teukert, Marcel Hartl, and Jake Girdwood-Reich were all available on Tuesday to speak to the media. And so we've talked about what Cedi's going to offer to the St. Louis City team itself. We've talked about what Hartl's going to offer. Even JGR, we speculated. But it was nice, honestly, to see a little bit behind the scenes, a little bit of the people who we're going to be getting for St. Louis City. And I enjoyed, in particular, hearing the stories of the timeline of recruitment around Teukert in particular, because if you remember back, Teukert was targeted as the Nico Joaquin replacement pretty publicly. He was the first name of 5 rumored strikers that we were interested in that was released after we had transferred Nico out to Como, and it never materialized. Hanover wanted too much money, but hearing Cedi speak, he was talking about being recruited by Lutz for the past 7 months or so, and immediately knew it was the next best step after that first call. And so this is a guy who knew that his contract with Hanover was expiring. He knew that he'd be leaving. Eventually, Hanover's season kind of hit tanked, and they weren't going to be able to reach promotion. And so he had his eyes set on St. Louis City. It sounds like from January. It was just how soon would he join them, and when it became clear that he was staying with Hanover, as he said, then he focused on them until the end of the season. But then he eventually he was all in on St. Louis, it sounds like, for this entire calendar year. And part of that goes to not just Lutz and Lutz pitching him on St. Louis and the style of play they play, the organization, the culture, but the familiarity with players. Cedric Teukert mentioned Edu Leuven played with him at Nuremberg as a close contact. And he said, quote, "It makes me happy when I see Edu. I love this guy." Mm-hmm. So that's always good to see between two of your top stars. And he also mentioned Joachim Nilsson and him have the same agent. And so there's familiarity with some of these players. And so when I mentioned earlier about players talking, especially the new guys coming in, this is kind of what I mean. Edu's going to be giving background on the fans, what he can expect, and Nilsson as well on what's going on in the culture around St. Louis. And that's awesome. And so how can Cedric Teukert help us? And how is he going to slide in for St. Louis City? I really enjoyed that we got to see our first glimpse of this against SKC. That was a pleasant, I wouldn't say pleasant surprise necessarily, because we had him in our projected lineup. The talk had been properly hyping him up for seeing time in this game. But it was extremely noteworthy that coming into St. Louis, a lot of fans noted that he had played the 9 plenty of times before, and that seemed like his primary position. But coming in against SKC, he plays off of the 9, the left mid, left wing, second striker, however you want to look at it. And it's Knut Thorsen who takes that striker role, a role that John Hackworth had said very specifically is not his role. He's playing him out of position at the 9. And so one takeaway I still have today is the thought process and almost the cascading effect of who do you want to put in a position to start with and then work things around that player. Like, I don't think you go into a lineup and say, all right, of all these healthy guys, Thorson's going to be my starter up top. He has to be there. I don't think that's ever a conversation you want to start with. And so hearing from Cedric Teukert say that his best position is between the lines, a little bit behind the striker, makes for a little bit more space, one step from the defensive player. Playing in between those lines, having a little more space to work, that seems like Cedric Teukert was slotted in this SKC game in a position that we're probably going to see him at a little bit more often than not. And so, Phil, I'm wondering how you thought of it, whether you were able to see that SKC game, because I know you were on vacation, but the concept of Cedric Teukert out there, leaving right now, Knut Thorson still our only healthy forward outside of Teukert, waiting for Klaus to get healthy. I thought what we saw from Cedric Teukert was pretty good overall. It was glimpses, moments. He didn't have a whole lot of attacking momentum with the ball, but thought what he was able to do showed a lot of promise in those spaces a little bit behind that striker.
Completely agree. That one step from the defensive player statement that he made make a lot of sense, because that's what I was most impressed by in that game with SKC, is he kept dribbling forward at a very high speed. And he was so close to the defender. I thought he was going to lose the ball 3 times, maybe 5 times before he did on a couple of those runs. And I think he got a shot off on one of them that was just wide. So, he's looking very good. And I love we're on the same wavelength, Matt, because I thought the same thing. I thought, especially after seeing like those teaser videos of him finishing in front of goal when he first came in the first couple training sessions, I was like, well, okay, he's going to take over the 9 until Klaus has to come back. And so I expected that. And I thought, maybe Thorson would go out wide again. I wouldn't have been surprised with the 2 striker ordeal up top. Maybe they share the duties and they kind of trade off, but no, they put him in his most comfortable spot. And so I wonder too, is that going to happen continually, or is it like he came into town and they put him where he's comfortable because he just jumped in, right? And so not only that, but Thorson has scored some goals in the 9 position against what we may have expected. So lots going around, and I don't necessarily think that's going to stay that way. But very interesting. Those were the 2 main takeaways for me as well, Matt.
Yeah, and the next guy that I want to talk about is Marcel Hartl, and I think this is, in the past few weeks especially, this is the player that St. Louis City fans are most excited about. Cedric Teukert has had the benefit of a slow build to the excitement, and it's kind of, we just are so waiting for him to take his role in our attack. But one of the consistent problems we've had, and we'll touch on this in some of the things we want to improve on in this next month, has been our ball progression and our ability not just to play on the ball, but our ability to meaningfully progress it into more high quality chances. Our performance in the first 2/3 of this season, as far as quality of individual shot, our expected goals per shot, has been abysmal. Bottom of the league. Terrible. We put ourselves in the worst overall positions to take shots consistently this year, and it needs to be improved. And Marcel Hartl is the guy who I would point to as most likely to improve that. He arrived last Sunday. He tried getting here earlier on Sunday, but the story of him arriving is actually kind of funny. He tried to get here last Sunday before that to make the match for SKC, but it was a combination of visa issues, and if this tells you the kind of off the field player he is, he stayed back home because his daughter was sick. And so that was just one of those things that pushed the timeline back a few days. He didn't get his visa until last Thursday, he said, and that's why all the conversation at the end of last week around Hackworth, really emphasizing it's going to be a photo finish on walking off the plane, getting straight to the game in Kansas. And we made fun of all of the internet outages, the IT outages last week, causing issues with flights. Turns out he had a sick daughter that had to push back a little bit. So that's what was going on with Hartl. And he had a lot of the same things to talk about. He said the same things as Cedric Teukert on why he came to St. Louis. Not just conversations with the players, but Lutz Pfannenstiel sold him on St. Louis just as well. He said he talked to Lutz, very good conversations. It made the decision so easy. From the first time that Lutz talked to him, it seemed like he was sold on it. And turns out Hartl was here for 3 days to finalize everything a few weeks ago, and seeing the city, seeing the facilities, it just made the decision all the much easier for him. And when it comes time to actually make an impact for St. Louis, it sounds like Hartle is chomping at the bit. If you remember last week and before, John Hackworth was very clear about Hartle claiming, I eat right, I train right, I keep my body right, I can go. Like, I don't need acclimation. If you get me into this training, I'll be ready to go. So that's why we were talking about, okay, maybe he can walk off right off a plane and come into Children's Mercy Park and play. But Hartle says this was when he was on Tuesday. He said it starts today in training. This first day in training with the players. The goal is to get in the team as fast as possible. Hartle said he talked to a lot of the players, and it's a very open team, very friendly. And he said he thinks that acclimation will go fast. So he's expecting to be able to get some minutes and impact the team as quick as possible. So definitely not out of the realm of possibility that you could see him this weekend, whether it's in a sub role or just on the match day roster or whatever. It's some of the interesting things that Hartle had to say about his time before St. Louis and coming to. He didn't know much about MLS, but typically, as a family guy would, he talked with his wife, and towards the end of the 2 Bundesliga season, it was clear what they wanted to do. All of Hartle's conversations on coming to St. Louis, the decision to leave Germany, it was all they, it was we, it was us. And it was very much a family decision because that's what he's bringing. He's bringing child and wife, and he's bringing his family, and that's meaningful that he would be willing to take that risk. They would be willing to take that risk to come to St. Louis. I think that's something that we as St. Louis City fans have to appreciate. It was very clear to Hartle what he wanted to do after St. Pauli. He was open to something new. He was open to getting out of Germany and seeing another city in another country. And he didn't let the coaching change really impact that, because this was asked on Tuesday as well. Hartle said he'd met Bradley Carnell when he was out here. So that gives you kind of a timeline on when he was out here before for his 3 days, if he met Bradley Carnell as the coach. But unlike a player like Indiana Vassilev, who this was the first time he went through a coaching change, Hartle said it's not the first time in his career that his coach had been fired. And it's not even really his coach because he wasn't here yet, but he was saying he was sitting at home. It was on the internet. Lutz called him and told him. So he didn't really have as much interaction with that. The coach itself didn't seem to matter as much. And this reminded me a whole lot of what Lutz and Diego had said in their press conference after Carnell left, that it's not the coach's job to come up with the style of play. It's not the coach's job to create something from nothing. It's the coach's job to coach the players, get the best out of the players, and implement the style of play that comes from up high, from Lutz, from Diego. So what is Marcel Hartle's style of play? And I really like this answer. It's very clear, very succinct, very easy. Hartle says, quote, "I'm a player who loves the ball, who wants the ball every time, to create a lot of chances and to sometimes make things the opponent will never think about, the magic moments." And that is the reason, put as simply as possible, why I'm so excited about Marcel Hartle.
I mean, that is the mind of a 10 right there, right?
Yes.
You know, creative, wants the ball. And it's just something that St. Louis has been missing, you know, and I think when there was a bit of a pivot to possess the ball and to figure out unlock defenses, I think this is the piece that was missing. And I think it could have been solved in a lot of different ways. And actually, I think we talked about many of those different ways before we had any rumors of players at all. Mm-hmm. And to be honest with you guys, I think Teukert and Hartle were 2 different ways to unlock defenses. So lots of weapons for, oh my gosh, for Hark. Oh my gosh, I keep wanting to call him Harks.
Hartle?
Why? What's that?
Hackworth.
My goodness, my mind. I'm not back from Greece yet, from Europe, guys. Sorry about that. But anyway, a lot of tools for Hackworth to work with and the next coach, if that were to happen. And we have more players to talk about. We got to speed this up a bit, Matt. We're at 30 minutes here, but these 2 should go a little bit quicker. But my goodness, we are kind of spoiled for riches compared to what it's been for the last several weeks.
I know it's all hitting like a fire hose at this point, but JGR is the difference. So we're pivoting from experience, from being wooed so you can come and make an immediate impact at JGR. Jake Girdwood Reich, 20-year-old Australian center back, center defensive mid from Sydney FC. And JGR, as a 20-year-old, first time out of the country, you can imagine, no matter what age or life experiences that you're listening to us bringing, imagine being 20 years old. Imagine moving out of the country and being asked to perform at a high level at whatever your job is. That's what JGR is doing. And so his day-to-day now is basically watching games, getting up to speed, learning the nuances of St. Louis City. He did note that Sydney FC is similar in style to St. Louis, which suits him quite well. He said the city looks nice and peaceful. He did specify that he can play center back, center defensive mid, and that he confirmed he played center back all of last season. So this was a case where he grew up as a defensive midfielder, and then they moved him to center back. He called last year like his coming out time. So last year he really broke free, kind of had a breakout year, and it was at center back. So I think that's noteworthy in what I was trying to read between the lines of what he said. As far as his recruitment goes, he said that Lutz began recruiting him about 2 months at the back of his season. And so trying to translate Australian to English on this one, last couple months of his season with Sydney FC, but he had a lot of national team stuff going on, he said. So he's U23 player for the Australian national team. So he was in and out of the country for a lot. It was tough to keep in contact, but as soon as he heard Lutz explain the club, the facilities, he, quote, felt this feeling and knew straight away I wanted to come. That's huge for Lutz 3 for 3 on being the person who's able to convince and sell quickly and easily what he's built in St. Louis. So when we get to see these guys on the field, I think that's going to reinforce the impact that Lutz had and continues to have in crafting this team. JGR reinforced the style of play that suits him well as a reason why this made sense versus going to Europe, because there were rumors that he had interest from Europe and he chose to come to St. Louis instead. He said, quote, it's a really good stepping stone in my career. So if you're a 20-year-old player, you're coming to America, you're coming to MLS on a U22 contract, you're under contract till 2028, you're going to leave here potentially if you last your entire contract at a prime spot in your career. And it wouldn't surprise me if JGR breaks loose and has a breakout season or two with St. Louis, that he could be sold for a 7-figure deal down the line before his contract's up. I don't want to put those expectations on him necessarily, but when you think of glimmers in the future, that's absolutely something that crosses my mind. JGR did talk, though, about how mentally tough this is making his first move. Like I said, 20-year-old, leaving the country for the first time. He said he's always wanted to play overseas. So, quote, making myself in an uncomfortable position to grow as a person and a player. So this is a guy with a lot of expectations of himself here. The fun story for JGR, he said that when he was really young, he played a bit of cricket, but it was always soccer for him. He was never a player of another sport. He watches other sports. He noted that soccer is not the main sport in Australia, but he only plays soccer. And the origin story that he gave of his soccer career is when he was 6 years old, he had a best friend whose mom took him to a soccer club. The moms were talking. JGR's mom asked if he wanted to play soccer. And at first he said no, he wanted to play rugby. But he eventually went, and he eventually ended up going, falling in love with the sport. And as they say, the rest is history. So now we have a player in JGR who calls himself quite an aggressive player. He likes to press. He likes to get the ball at his feet, play out of the back, and is a hardworking type of player. So he could add different dimensions in and of himself on how we are able to move the ball and progress once he sees time, depending on if he plays center back or center defensive mid. I could see multiple ways in the value of him with the ball at his feet once we see a little bit of that. And I guess test the quality of that against MLS competition. But it definitely offers a little insight into how he can meaningfully change what we're seeing at center back and center defensive mid in St. Louis.
Yep. Mobile center back or, a shutdown defensive mid. I can see him doing both of those depending on his level, right? I think MLS might push him. I get a bit of a feel like Blom. Like Blom is going to get pushed in MLS always, and he is being pushed. He is improving. He's still not, a top center defensive mid in MLS, and I think JGR might be in the same boat there. Interesting. It'll be interesting to see him play versus Wenzel, versus Hebert, and where his level ends up being. The last one is Simon Betcher, former SLU player, being signed to St. Louis. A bit of a surprise here, but we knew he was on the radar at some point. Matt, I totally forgot. I'm the one that did that interview.
It was you.
It was teased with Lutz, not with Lutz. Manuel Vaith. My brain is mush. I apologize. So, good find there, because I totally forgot that this was rumored, and it happened even after him going to Denmark to play. But he's coming back on loan. I was happy to hear that, Matt.
Yes, full credit to Chris Gebhardt, STL Soccer News. He liked that tweet from back in 2023, and it brought it back to my attention.
Wild.
And you did have an interview with Manuel Vaith at the start of 2023, looking at Simon Betcher, where Vaith dropped the bomb that St. Louis City was actually courting and looking at Simon Betcher around the expansion draft time that we took Nico Gioacchini. And building our initial team, they were eyeing him. He had been drafted in the Super Draft by Vancouver the year before. He had been playing with Whitecaps 2 in the season before St. Louis started. Once we drafted Gioacchini, though, didn't need that space anymore for the attacker, and so it kind of petered out. Betcher went on to have a pretty stellar start to 2023. He was the quickest player in MLS history to score 4 goals. It was either 83 or 87 minutes. I don't have the number in front of me, but it was fast. It was a hat trick and then another goal. It was boom, boom. But then as fast as his fuse burned, it burned out in Vancouver because he couldn't break through that Ryan Gauld, Brian White combination duo, the Brian White story, the Brian Ryan story rather. And so he ended up being sold to AC Horsens. So AC Horsens in the second tier of the Danish leagues. They call it the first division, but AC Horsens where he landed January trade this past season. And so now we acquire him on loan. So it all comes full circle. He's back. We have acquired him on loan through June 2025. And we have an option to purchase that would keep him on contract until the end of 2026 with then club options for 27 and 28. So there's a whole lot of flexibility that St. Louis has with this move. Betcher's 25 years old, a St. Louis University alumni. He played with Johnny Klein. John Hackworth had a chance to see him when he was here. I mean, there's a lot of experience with this club and Simon Betcher. They've scouted him. They know him for a long time. So it's going to be exciting to see what he's able to bring to this club in the extreme near term, because he could see the field very quickly before we get some of this attacking depth up and running and back from injury. But also long-term, what the club has planned for him and how he can compete with guys like Knut Thorsen. I'm excited to see just the homegrown type story. I know he was born in Kansas, in Topeka, I believe, but that SLU story is just so epic. And Betcher's family, St. Louis Soccer Hall of Fame for his uncle, I think, uncle or grandfather.
I think it's uncle. Yes.
There it is. So this is fantastic for us. It's a feel-good story. So Betcher on loan for St. Louis until June 2025.
Yeah, and obviously there's a hole, not just with injuries, but with Sam Adeniran leaving. And so, just to compare Sam and Betcher, they both had, more goals than maybe you'd expect in their MLS minutes with not very many MLS minutes. I would say Sam is more on fire on the field, but Simon Betcher definitely has more tools than Sam. So we're not saying he's going to be as good as Sam. He could be better. Could go either way, but I do think he's going to come in with a good attitude coming from SLU, looking at the way he plays. This is something that I think we can count on Simon Betcher being a good soldier going forward, whether he gets a lot of minutes or not. He's definitely going to fit the style. I'm not worried about him at all. And looking at our roster right now, I agree with you, Matt. I think he's going to get quite a bit of minutes right off the bat, just to kind of fill some holes at the 9.
Do you want to pivot and spend the rest of the KTRS portion talking about the depth?
Yes, let's talk about it. I think we got a little bit of time. Let's rush through it, Matt, as best we can.
Well, we're full. I mean, we're full up on our roster. I created a roster profile that kind of mirrored what MLS put out, and we're full up right now. The only open roster slot we have could be an injury replacement for Tomas Ostrak. And MLS roster rules allow for one replacement to a season-ending injury player. So even though we're out Ostrak and Salio, we can only replace one of them. And if we do, it would be Ostrak, because the rules also say you can sign a player for up to that replacement salary. Ostrak is making more than Salio, around $800,000. So we're going to have that available to us. And then I kind of teased it out a little bit. I guess I don't know really what else way to put it, that St. Louis City is interested in still signing more players in this window. We are in the market for a left back, and we are possibly in the market for a center defensive mid. So that position, if signed during the summer transfer window, one player could take up, say, Tomas Ostrak's injury replacement roster slot. But other than that, we're full up on the senior roster. So we would have to make a corresponding move somehow if we sign 2 players. And we seem to be going for it here. Full up on the depth chart, still looking at players. And that the summer transfer window is the window to sign players. We were talking about this off air, Phil, that it's the global offseason transfer window. So this is when contracts are up. This is when players are looking to make moves away in Europe. And so this is when we're making our move, not just for 2024, but for 2025. So what does our depth chart look like? Well, right now we have Roman Berkey and Ben Lunt as our goalkeepers, with Christian Oliveras also on roster. Left backs, we've got Kyle Hebert, Jay Reed, and Anthony Markanek. Center backs, Tim Parker, Josh Yarrow, Michael Wenzel, and JGR. Kyle Hebert also can play center back. Joachim Nilsson is out with an injury. Right backs, we have Thomas Totland, Akil Watts, and Jake Nerwinski, with Akil Watts able to play both left back and center mid. Center mids themselves, Chris Durkin, Jabulu Blom, and Edu Leuven, with JGR also able to play, and Jose Kojima able to play that position. Attacking mids, we have Indiana Vasilev, Marcel Hartle, Jose Kojima, and John Klein, with Rasmus Alm still hurt, and a whole lot of flexibility in who can move around there. Forwards, Knut Thorsen, Cedric Teukert, Simon Betcher, and Caden Glover, with obviously Teukert can be an attacking mid underneath striker. So I have an easy time myself putting together possible starting 11 using this depth, assuming that we have Teukert fully available, Hartle is going to be fully available, and JGR is up to speed. Do you have as straight line of where you see this depth?
I mean, the depth is good, and I think I'm excited to see some people come back from injury, where it's going to be extremely exciting. And I think, like, we were talking about Thorsen and looking at like the new players coming in, and once they kind of take over, the fact that Thorsen has 3 goals doesn't mean he just goes straight to the bench or anything. I think you got to keep playing him, and maybe you just use him more in his more regular role, but I think he's not going to go away at the 9 quite yet until Klaus is fully implemented, and depending on how good Betcher does or does not do. I think it's good, and it's going to get better throughout the rest of the season. I think we all have eyes for 2025 for, boy, it's going to be a battle for starting positions if all these guys come back healthy in 2025, right?
That's the thing, is I can see our depth going into 2025 being markedly better than what we started with, even with Nico Gioacchini being on the roster, you can argue, coming into 2024. So even setting aside the injuries, because this year, one of the things that I've been frustrated with is it almost feels like we missed a transfer window, so to speak. We were talking about this off air too, that and I was saying it was the last summer was when we kind of missed, in the sense that we were having such a successful year and we thought those players were of such high caliber in MLS and they could continue that going on, that we made depth additions. We added Anthony Markanic and Knut Thorsen, neither of which were meant to be, I think, full-time starters. You think Thorsen can fight for that full-time starter, but Anthony Markanic was brought in to be a backup left back as you continue to search for a higher caliber player. Give him the opportunity to start and see what he can do with it. Yeah. But I think we're seeing that we need an improvement at left back. Next year, I think we're finally seeing that next step forward of significant improvement in quality of the depth and not just adding bodies that can maintain the quality we had going into 2023. If I were to project a starting 11 from the guys that I just listed, taking out of the equation Nilsson, Alm, and Klaus because they're hurt, I'm talking about the other side of this break. I'm talking, and potentially even during it, I don't know when some of these Teukert and Hartle is going to be available. I would look to obviously Roman Berkey as our goalkeeper. I would look to either Kyle Hiebert or Jay Reed at left back, depending on the look that you want to have. Hiebert offers a lot more defense and Jay Reed offers the two-way. So depends on how you want to attack, either Hiebert or Reed at left back. I have Tim Parker and probably any of Josh Arrow, JGR, or Michael Wenzel. I mean, honestly, somebody has to win that battle in training. That I could see quality no matter where it is, but somebody has to win that battle. And so
I'll clarify for you. I think Yarrow's in the lead right now, and then I'm curious if JGR is able to take it over.
I like that. I can absolutely see that. So we'll say Parker and Yarrow for the moment. Thomas Totland's an obvious right back. That's easy. Yeah. Durkin and Leuven are center mids. I think that's written in stone for the moment, at least. And the attacking mids, if you're going to take 3 of them in a 4-2-3-1 formation, right now, I think it would be Indy and Hartle have their spots, and then Kojima or Klein, depending on what you're going to do out wide. I don't see why one is necessarily over the other at the moment. We've seen games so far where Klein has gotten the start and Kojima's come off the bench. So Indy and Hartle have their spots. It's Kojima and Klein to fight for that third attacking mid. And then up top, if you're going to have that, then you have to put Teukert, but also why not have an attacking mid combo of Indy, Hartle, and Cedric Teukert? Why not drop him back like he was in SKC if you're going to have a 4-2-3-1? Teukert can be that left mid. Indy can be right. You have Indy cutting in. Hartle takes the 10. That has such a beautiful appeal of 3 attacking mids underneath Knut Thorsen, who I think does still continue in that role. There's no reason to think that he's going to lose that until Klaus comes back. And I don't see Teukert taking that job from him. I see Teukert being either a second striker if you do 4-4-2, or probably continue at the left mid if you're doing a 4-2-3-1.
Yep, and it gets even more fun if you start thinking about 3 in the back, which seemed like we kind of dabbled in that last game. So
a little bit.
I really enjoyed seeing Teukert and Leuven play underneath Thorsen. And if you kind of I think someone put out a lineup where Leuven and Durkin were the double pivot in a 3-back system, and having, Hartle, Teukert, and then a 9 with, up above those two. And that sounds like so much fun for an attacking team. So that's something I would love to see.
Well,
But
that's the other thing, Phil,
again,
though, is that
Hackworth, I remember now, Hackworth has a lot of options
Yes.
on what to play with here.
exactly what I was going to say. You could talk about 3 at the back, 4 at the back, 2 pivots, a single pivot,
Yeah.
4-4-2, 3 attacking mids. The options are bountiful with this caliber of players and the quality of the depth that we've started to accumulate. Once these guys get their sea legs, we could see a lot of really interesting dynamics at play.
Great. That's it from us today on the Big 550 KTRS. We are Flyover Footy. We're presented by Noble Ice Vineyards. Thank you so much for joining us as we kind of take you through this break here, this breath of air that we were talking about. Please do join us in the podcast version, because we're going to talk a little bit about some of the craziness that we heard about the Open Cup from the commissioner the other day. And so it's going to be a fun wind down. So join us on the podcast anywhere you get your podcast. Look up Flyover Footy and you can hear that. Again, thanks for joining us, guys. We'll talk to you next time. Okay.
Be right back.
Yeah. Refill.
Totally forgot to do this. Totally didn't realize my flag was down this whole time. I'm so embarrassed. I think Salio could be a dangerous left back, left wing back as well. I was thinking Indy could even slot back to that role if you're needing him to. We didn't even get through half of, or that last bit of that I thought we were going to. So it always happens that way. I thought we were being brief, and then we weren't brief on the new guys.
Yeah, I wasted a little more time than I usually like to. So
I dragged us through that first segment with the Open Cup stuff.
So we're both guilty.
I think it needed to, though. Like if we're gonna miss a fallout, if we're gonna have a different feel to it, I think it was necessary.
I think it's important. I don't know. It may or may not be important. It's important to you and me, clearly, that we make sure the tone is set correctly. I think it's a Midwestern thing,
Yeah, I definitely think so. And
clarifying like what we care the most about, and to make sure everyone feels welcome to feel however they feel, Yeah.
Very important. Ready whenever you are.
When I moved, quickly, whenever I moved to New York, it was very weird for me. I lived in New York City for like a year.
Oh yeah?
And people aren't like that up there. You know what I mean? Like,
oh yeah.
They don't really give a fuck. They like feel however you want. I'm doing my thing, you do your thing. And so it's definitely more of a Midwestern thing to like, we care how you feel. We feel very strongly about how we feel, that kind of thing. So
that's fair. I like that.
I like it too. I mean, we came back to the Midwest, obviously. So
right.
So do you want to cover some of that stuff again before we move on, or do you want to kind of jump into the Garber stuff?
We can just jump straight into the Garber stuff, and if we we can circle back to some of those questions to end the show.
Cool. Love it. Yeah.
End it on a good note.
Yes. And chat, feel free to go crazy because we can bring you in on this one.
That's right.
Thanks. Is it Hartle or Teukert that was at Schalke shortly? That's why I put it on, but I couldn't remember which. I want to say it was Teukert. Teukert, you've really been nailing Teukert today.
Well,
you've been practicing in the mirror?
No. So I've heard from reliable sources that it's Teukert, and I have seen and heard from my own ears that it's from a reliable source that it's Teukert.
Yes.
Like so because I can't reliably say the or the whatever that is, I've just been saying Teukert. It's the Americanized version of that I trust myself with to say
Fair.
offhand, as opposed to saying Toykert, because I don't want to say k. It's not a hard k.
Yeah. Fair enough. And that's how the
Hartle
club
is much
sent it.
easier. Hartle is much easier. And
Much
JGR is the easiest. Let's just.
Well, I don't know. Reich?
That's why I say JGR. That's
Yeah,
the
I know. Cool.
Actually,
Well,
let's start it with the Choo Choo story real quick.
okay, sounds good. Here we go. Welcome everyone to the wind down. I thought it was a Bush for a second, Matt.
No, it's a Battle Brew IPA ale that's kind of exploding on me right now.
Who makes it? I've never heard of that.
It's Iron Hops Brewing, and it is one of their 2 Battlehawks themed beers.
Oh, cool.
It's a nice IPA. Very nice. I appreciate this. The other one was a lager. It was the Cacao lager or Cacager or something like that.
Nice. That's great.
Yeah.
That'll
So
awesome.
I wanted to start the wind down, if you don't mind, with a little aside, because if you weren't on social media and you missed this joke, I think it's worth hearing. There was a fan on social media who said that either their cousin or brother or somebody saw Cedric Teuchert over in Germany, or saw his sister over in Germany, I should say, and she said that his nickname was Choo Choo. And so I had the opportunity to ask Cedric Teuchert about this after his comments at the press conference. And his nickname, yes, he has SETI as a nickname. That's what the club's been using that. I called him that earlier in the show. SETI is absolutely good. But when I asked him if there's any truth to the rumor that his nickname is Choo Choo, he laughed, said no, retold that whole story about the fan meeting his sister in Cologne at a concert or something, or at a train station. I forget where it was, but it was in Cologne. And she said, yeah, take care of Choo Choo.
That's amazing.
And he claims that this is the first time he's ever heard that nickname. And so I'm left just like slack-jawed because his sister is messing with a City fan to get us to call Cedric Teuchert Choo Choo.
Is that what it is?
That's the only conclusion I could draw at the time. And I asked, so I was like, so that's never been your nickname? He said, no. I said, do you like it? He goes, yeah, I kind of like it.
No, okay. So I thought I read it quickly. I didn't like double back and study this tweet, but I thought maybe this moral of the story was that he's a very dry sense of humor, and that we didn't catch on to the German sarcasm. Perhaps that's what I was thinking. That it has been Choo Choo all this time.
The look and the mannerisms, he really brushed it off as if that's never been a thing for him. Now he could be playing just as much as she was.
Exactly. Like who is faking us?
Right.
One or the other, right?
I kind of like the fact that we don't know, and that's just kind of the games that they're playing.
Yes.
And yeah, Jerry Hayes in our chat said, yeah, she saw Cedric Teuchert's sister, saw the fan wearing the kit, approached him and said, my brother's playing for that team.
Call him Choo Choo.
Yes. Choo Choo is now an approved nickname.
Oh my Lord. Oh my gosh.
I love it so much.
I mean, the true moral of the story is we have no choice but to call him Choo Choo. It doesn't matter who's lying.
He said it's nice, so let's just go with it.
Yeah.
And he was so smiling, so happy. The press conference is on YouTube now, the club's YouTube. Go watch it. He was so excited. Like, and to frame it, you probably saw a couple times during the press conference itself, but he doesn't speak great English. And so Santi and I were talking, and Brendan Weezy and I were talking too after that press conference, and we realized how it's not just great for SETI and for Hartle to be out here and to be willing to do this when their English is not great. Like, God love Justin Horniker, who is on the Zoom asking both of them questions, and they had to have it repeated for him because, I mean, they're not perfect at it. And so they were willing to do all of this. They're still willing to joke around with us like that. I mean, these are good people, like good quality people we're adding to City's organization. And credit to the team too. So not just the players, but got to credit the team for making them available like this. Like they had talked about it with us for a couple weeks on how they want to present the new players. And Brendan Weezy had a comment because he's much more familiar with overall media with the Cardinals and the Blues and things like that.
Yeah.
He's like, the Cardinals would have never done this. Like we struggled to get players months after to even give us one interview, and they put all these guys out there front and center. And so you got to give credit to the team for being willing to do that, and to the players for willing to step in. Yeah, without translators. I mean, some of the players for the Cardinals really need translators, and we were talking no English, like Shohei Ohtani type no English. But even these players with a fairly good amount of English, like there were some words and some nuances that weren't there, but they were surprisingly good for what we were being sold on.
As an aside, we're so lucky to have Brendan. He's a grizzled vet, you know what I mean? And he loves soccer, so we're lucky to kind of have him. And Timmerman kind of the same way. They've seen a lot of stuff. They know soccer, and you know, some of us are kind of new at that the whole journalism thing or journalism adjacent kind of thing, but those guys are clearly good.
Inside baseball, if you didn't know where Tom Timmerman gets his hats, the answer is he has a hat shop in Spain.
Wild.
If he was on vacation for a few weeks in June with his wife out there, and so that's why he wasn't at some press conferences and stuff. And
so
come to find out, he has a hat guy.
Hat guy in Spain.
I love it.
That's good. That's good stuff. It's a good excuse to go to Spain every single year. That's his real motivation is my guess there.
Well, we've had the happy-go-lucky.
Yeah, exactly. That's a much better transition than I was trying to cook up here, Matt. Yeah, I'm just going to read Matt's bullet point here. Garber's latest garbage on U.S. Open Cup. Well done, sir.
Yeah,
we could just call the episode that.
We could. I've really fallen in love with alliteration to the point where my wife she hates every time I do it now. And every time I put a title on our episode or put a graphic out there, she was like, "You did that, didn't you?"
Oh,
yeah, of course I did.
Absolutely.
I'm obsessed. I have a problem with alliteration.
You have my support, sir.
So this week we mentioned it in the main part of the KTRS part of the episode that Don Garber spoke ahead of the All-Star game, ahead of the All-Star break, and like he always does, he gave a state of the league. He talked on a variety of topics, from the fact that the Indianapolis mayor was at the All-Star game, the fact that the next expansion team will pay over $500 million, which is what San Diego FC paid. St. Louis, for reference, paid $200 million, which we thought was extraordinary at the time. But most of his attention this week came from his comments on the U.S. Open Cup, because this is the tournament that was cited originally as by fans, reading between the lines, as fixture congestion was what MLS, one of the reasons why they said they were pulling out of the U.S. Open Cup, in addition to their perceived quality. And they went ahead and created a month-long break of the season for this tournament. So Garber was very much backing the owners, backing the league, obviously. Some of the things that he said were that they have good governance in MLS, rather than the commissioner making a decision on his own, or the tech staff or the business staff making the decision in the front office. They sit down in committees and they decide in those committees what's the best path forward. We know we have sporting committees, competition committees, technical, all of these things that determine the face of MLS, how it's going to look. They have these committees for. And St. Louis City is not, for the record, on the committee that makes the decision or made the decision about pulling out of the U.S. Open Cup. They were not one of those owners. The list of owners is out there on social media. We're not going to go into it, but suffice to say, SKC's ownership is on that committee. Anyway, Garber said that the decision this year was on Champions Cup qualification and other schedule dynamics. And then we had a handful of clubs come to us and say, we want to play. But by then, he said, it was too late. So this, to me, before we move on, calls into question immediately what the process was, because as far as we understood, the process is that the committees make the recommendations, they bring it to the owners at large, and the owners at large vote on it. And so there's something fishy going on here about the competition committee decides it's going to be on Champions Cup qualification. They're going to bring in MLS Next Pro teams. And then all of a sudden, once it's approved and validated, you have a handful of clubs saying we want to play. Did these handful of clubs vote on this? And how did they vote? And then they came to them? Or did these handful of clubs that I would assume include St. Louis and Cincinnati, because we know Cincinnati made a statement when this was first announced earlier this year. Did these clubs vote no? And then they didn't get a chance to say whether they wanted to play or not until after it was already approved.
And let's just put these two statements right next to each other. First, he says, we have good governance in MLS. And then you see that they make a decision, and then we had a handful of clubs come to us and say we want to play, but by then it was too late. To me, that's not good governance. You know what I mean? Like, that sounds like you made a decision without everybody's approval. That sounds like bad governance to me. And maybe that's obvious, but that was my first thought. But it was interesting because also the cup.us, did you see this argument on Twitter? They were the ones saying that everyone did get a vote, every single club, and that they had inside information on that, and they made it public. So, I mean, he's a good guy, Josh and Hakala, and I assume he's right. But the details are not matching up here. And it's just like, it's either bad communication or someone's lying, and maybe both,
or it could have been circumstances. So I suppose that you could have had a scenario, and it's probably a fruitless effort to speculate, but I'm going to do it anyway. I suppose you could have a scenario of,
what choice do we have here?
Right. We know these owners don't get together often for these board of governors meetings. They happen around the big times, like the All-Star break. They happen during around MLS Cup, and I think once or twice other times throughout the year, where they get together and they vote on things that have been brought from the competition committee. So good governance, does that mean that the competition committee meets outside of the bounds of these board of governors meetings? They come up with recommendations. They send the recommendations out to everybody to digest, to review, to talk with their staffs about. And then the board of governors have the vote by the owners or the proxies? Or do the board of governors basically either not send information out ahead of time, make a presentation at the board, the committee? I mean, do the committee make a presentation at the board of governors meetings to the full ownership group and say, we have to vote on this now, or we're asking you to vote on this now? And the owners there might not be the most soccer savvy people. They hear what sounds like a good idea. It makes sense for their club on paper. And so they vote for it. And then they go back and then come to find out what they actually voted for. Also not good governance. So no matter, I struggle that no matter how you're guessing about the process, I struggle that if you have to say a phrase like, we had owners coming to us wanting to do something, but by the time they did, it was too late. That's not good governance to not give your owners a voice.
Completely agree. Because and maybe, maybe they lost the full vote, and now he's just kind of in hindsight saying it was too late. We voted, we had a super majority is the other rumor.
Yeah.
And
which I can believe.
Maybe the handful of clubs were just like, they lost, and after everything went down, he maybe realized maybe we should have let these people play.
Why they voted against it. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I hope they see this as a mistake, and it'd be really nice if they could just announce it, and then we could all just go on with our lives normally and say, we're in it next year. And the Open Cup probably moves too slow for that, but that's what I wish could happen, so we could all just like live happily ever after to some extent.
Well, the idea of the Champions Cup qualification on paper, if you take a few things as givens, could make sense.
Mm-hmm.
The givens would be that you're not required to play in the US Open Cup. The givens would be that you are playing in Leagues Cup, and you're continuing with that because it makes you a lot of money and it grows how you see the sport and your league growing. We fundamentally disagree with the first given on that MLS has a choice in the matter of whether to play in US Open Cup. That's one of our fundamental underlying issues, is that the US Open Cup is a requirement of the USSF, US Soccer Federation bylaws, for a first division and second and third to compete, to be sanctioned as a team in a sanctioned division. You have to compete your top eligible team in the US Open Cup. It is in the bylaws. So that's one of the reasons why we had this fundamental uproar of MLS. Is they talk about, Garber said, we're now looking at how to present a plan to US soccer that is orderly and makes sense. Sorry, dude, you don't get to present a plan based on how the bylaws are written. The bylaws say that you're competing. you're presenting a plan is both and or holding US soccer hostage because of the power you have, but also using your position as both a US soccer board member and commissioner of MLS to play both sides and to weasel in what MLS wants to do in US soccer. There's nothing about, and US soccer clearly had no interest in suing MLS or uh, taking away their sanctioning, desanctioning MLS. That was pretty, it was reported multiple times that was never a serious consideration by US soccer. I don't think they wanted to open up that hornet's nest. And so now you're having a scenario where Garber's emboldened. MLS owners are emboldened to be able to be the ones that dictate how the US Open Cup is operated in the future from a perspective of the first division teams. That's why I have little to no faith that the plan they're going to present is going to be satisfactory as far as getting 100% participation. But one of the underlying things too is we want St. Louis to compete and control what you can control, right? We want St. Louis to be at the table. And I think that's a benefit of what the supporter group's boycott has done. It's really reinforced that St. Louis needs to be at the table. I don't know if there would have been as much of a public statement initially by City when this deal was first announced, if it weren't for the backlash that the supporters started raising right off the bat. In December last year, in December when this was first leaked, that MLS wanted to pull all their teams out. The Luligans, the Punks, Fleur de Noise, the Santos, all these groups were united and loud in their boycotting of Leagues Cup at that point. And then that allowed City to get a lay of the land landscape going on here. And they knew that they should make a statement and support the US Open Cup when this decision actually came down. So what I think is more likely is each club is going to have their own choice. And they're going to make some kind of a plan or a process for if you might have a tiered number of choices, and you might have to reach a certain threshold for each team in the league. So saying you can have a choice, but if you're going to choose, then it depends on if you have Champions Cup qualification, and if you choose to play, you have to play your 2 team. They might do something like that. But ultimately, I think what City showed, St. Louis City, and what FC Cincinnati and probably some others have done is say that we want to have a choice. And so I look for that to be incorporated. Being the pragmatic person, the realistic person right now, I'll take my optimistic hat off. I don't see any path towards 100% full participation by all MLS clubs for 2025. I see the best path forward as allowing clubs to individually choose.
Yeah, and I'm okay with that because at least it feels like supporters have a voice in that path, right?
Sure.
Because I think most clubs will choose not to do it unless they feel like their supporters care. Because I don't think, I mean, let's be honest, like I think most MLS clubs would just like look at the money and not think about the history at all and just opt out, right? And I understand that from a gross business perspective. But I do think there's going to be this clout, right? Like where I think it's going to be in a certain way, it's going to like separate the men from the boys, the world soccer versus American sport ownership styles, right? Like, so we're going to see the teams who care about world soccer, the teams that want to operate like world soccer, the teams that want to, lift MLS into being something better than it is now. I talk a lot about the next phase of MLS, the next generation of MLS being a post-Garber phase, right? Yes. And I think, part of this announcement was that perhaps for now, San Diego is going to be the last expansion team. And once I've been looking for this milestone because once the expansion stopped, I thought, well, that's the day that maybe Garber won't hang around anymore and we can move on. We can turn into something really special now that we've grown to what we needed to be. Once we got the money and the players, I think we're about to be there, right? We're something on the world stage now, as far as talent, as far as academies, as far as quality of play. United States is rising as far as players in the world market. And MLS is getting there too. Now we can move to something better. Now we can move into what we were always meant to someday become. And so I hope that's what happens. And I do think US Open Cup is going to be like the dividing line between, owners that care, front offices that care, that want to lift American soccer to be something better than it is now, and people who just want to collect a paycheck every year, who want to spend the least amount they can, definitely break even, always increase the value of their club, while not spending too much and losing your money, your cash flow kind of revenue kind of stuff. Obviously I'm throwing Kroenke and Kraft into a corner, and we're looking at what St. Louis has been providing to the club. We're looking at what Miami's doing to some degree, even like Dallas. I think we're going to see a separation of the goods and the bads from a hipster soccer perspective, in my opinion. And I'm excited to see what that is, because I think it's going to be a very clear line.
Yeah. And I think, I wonder how much teams are going to, I wonder when they're going to have to make those decisions, because one of the other issues that plays into this that is always out there and we continue coming back to is the expansion of roster sizes to accommodate all of these different matches. And what I mentioned about Michael Wenzel earlier in the show, being unfamiliar with City 2 versus City structure, and you're just part of the organization. And if you need extra players, you pull from the extra players. And that's that. The more I think about it, the more that annoys me, because it's an MLSPA conversation as much as it is anything. They have to get a collective bargaining. It's a collective bargaining issue when you have to add something like that. And the solution is to add caveats in the roster rules to say you can pull up an unlimited amount of players for non-league competitions, or specify it for US Open Cup, you can pull up. So that way you can play your team as the first team, which to me does matter. It does matter whether you call yourself St. Louis City or City 2. I think that is an important distinction in the optics and the marketing of it all. And you can sell it as your organization is playing. Yeah, you're pulling guys up from City 2. You're pulling guys up from maybe, like, I don't know, whatever level plays, whatever you want to call it. UPSL, if they're eligible, however you want to be from your organization. But there are ways to market this appropriately, where you can market it as you're opening up the US Open Cup, the historic competition, to allow whatever choices teams want to make. You're opening it up to the entire organization. It's all of St. Louis City. It's not City. It's not City 2. It's not whatever other, it's not the town. It's not Quakes. It's the organization that you have, right? And I think that's an important distinction that does help align to a lot of the historical aspects and the allure that we see from Europe and in the different countries like Germany and England, the way that they are allowed to draw from their teams and their organizations. So that I think that would be a massive difference maker. The reason it annoys me is not that they haven't engaged in it and they seem unwilling to engage in that because of the CBA. It's annoying because they've engaged in aspects of the CBA when it benefits them directly. I'm talking about back in the pandemic timeframe when you had the MLS owners invoke their force majeure clause against in the CBA for the MLSPA, basically nullifying it and forcing the MLSPA back to the negotiating table. They did that during the pandemic because they were claiming they were losing so much money that the current path forward was not sustainable. And so they forced the MLSPA back to the negotiating table, despite the fact that they had a CBA for the next few years. MLS has options to go to the negotiating table if they wanted to do this, but it all goes back to the underlying financial aspects of it's not going to make them money, so they're not going to spend the time to go and overhaul the roster rules specifically for this purpose. And that to me is just incredibly annoying more than anything else.
Yeah, it's they've got blinders on. It's all they can see is money. They don't see that, the romantic side of the game in a non-gross way is like, that's what sells tickets for 200 years rather than, this year, like looking at Leagues Cup this year. Yes. If you're looking at dollars, that's what's going to sell you, get you the most money right this second. But if you're looking to sell this league to generations of Americans, generations of people outside the United States, like the Open Cup is part of that. You know what I mean? It's a very vital part of it. Not to mention the roster mechanizations that you're talking about here too. It's
Yeah.
all part of it. Being part of the world game means you just do it right, and that's something that the USL understands, right? I think they're growing slower, and they're there's penalties to it, right? But I
Yeah, I
think when
mean,
you're looking at the long haul, it's the way to go, and it's how you get kids on board and thinking the right way. It's how you get academies to think the right way. It's how you get
yeah.
ownership to think the right way. It's how you improve the national team, in my opinion, more than profit, more than force feeding dollar signs so we can get big players or the most quality players. It's more than that. It's more um multifaceted than that. It's a whole thing, right?
Yeah, and Alexi Guerreros from the Cooligans said some pretty poignant words on Morning Footy on the Galazzo Network, CBS Sports Galazzo Network. And he talked about how MLS should feel like they have a responsibility to US soccer, to the growth of the
Yeah.
federation as the first. You carry with you not just gravitas as the first division, but and it's not unlike the Premier League when they were first founded and the teams tried to break away from the EFL and create the Premier League and get above everything else. So MLS isn't necessarily they're not trying to reinvent the wheel when it comes to a first division trying to stomp all over everybody else and break away with your most powerful teams type of a thing. Even the Super League can be used as an example of this, but MLS just seems like they have so much clout now that they are not beholden to the bylaws that have kept them in this structure. And when it comes to the US Open Cup, they have very much seemed like they're above that at this point. But Phil, I have a question for you in a slight pivot from this, unless you have anything else on the Garber stuff. Okay. My question is, and I had this asked to me, this week, and the question that was posed to me this week was in the sense of the both the boycott decision and the underlying reason of City fans. And I think we answered this a little bit earlier, but I wanted to have this conversation in particular for us just to get it out there. I think transparency is a good thing in how we were talking. But let's say hypothetically that the we had a terrible 2023 season. We didn't qualify for Champions Cup, or at least we had an expected 2023 season. We didn't qualify for Champions Cup. And so we were one of the teams in MLS, one of the 8 or so that competed in US Open Cup this year with this current plan. What do you think would have played out in the landscape in St. Louis? Do you think that the boycott still would have gone into effect? Do you think that fans would have been altruistic about the concept of MLS not being 100% fully participated in US Open Cup? Or do you think that we would have been business as usual if St. Louis would have been allowed to play in it? Oh man, I think I lost Phil. Maybe it's a question better left unanswered. Is it Phil or is it me? Chat, can you guys hear me? Okay. Well, maybe Phil will join us in a second because we're just having some dead air right now. I kind of really want the answer to this. Let me know if you can talk, Phil. Feel free to interrupt me when you're if you're back.
Hello, hello. Check, check, check.
Hey, you're back. Maybe you're back.
Check, check, check.
Hello. Poor guy. He's back he just got back from vacation like yesterday.
Check, check, check.
Hey, Phil. I don't even want to give my thoughts on this question until I give Phil a chance to.
Hey.
Hey,
Check.
hey.
Hello.
This is what Phil does. This is what Phil does right before we go live. This is his check thing. So if you ever wondered, chat, tell me. This isn't going on the pod, so tell me if City 2 or City. The question was if none of the other decisions had been any different from MLS, and we were poor in 2023. We didn't qualify for Champions Cup, so we were allowed to play in the US Open Cup. Would you still want a boycott of the US Open Cup? It's very much a hypothetical, altruistic type question. But I struggled with it when I thought of it myself. So I'm very curious. I don't know if I'm going to post this on social media, but I'm just kind of curious what everybody thinks. It's a tough concept because when it was put to me, it was in the sense of, are we knowing that City didn't have a real say and trying to determine the course of events that went in, are we actually on some level hurting City for doing well last year as opposed to hurting MLS for making this decision? Are you back?
I think. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Are you good?
Yeah, I hear you now too. I'm really sorry if I messed that up.
No, you're good.
It's a great question.
Let me reframe it because I'll go back and if I do the editing, I'll be able to splice it together. So let me
Okay.
let me re-ask that.
Oh yeah, you could hear me testing. Sorry.
All right, you ready? Ready to come back in?
Ready.
All right, but Phil, I wanted to ask you a question, and this was posed to me this week. It's a hypothetical question, but I think it's not really fun, but it's something to think about in the context of all of this, especially with what we just talked about what we expect going forward with MLS, with US Open Cup, and with St. Louis participation. So let's say that this past season, the decision by MLS was no different. They still say they're basing it off Champions Cup qualification for who doesn't play at all. They allow some MLS Next Pro teams, and then the worst teams from last year have their first teams play. If St. Louis had played down to expectations from 2023 and we finished near the bottom, and St. Louis City, the top team, was in US Open Cup this year, but they still had the same overall climate going on where they cut out the top teams for Champions Cup. They didn't have full participation, but St. Louis was in it. How would you feel? And do you think that there would be as big of a boycott or any boycott in St. Louis?
That's a great question because I don't think it would be nearly as rabid. I think I was a little surprised. St. Louis soccer fans really surprised me sometimes because, we looked at that picture of all the tickets available for Leagues Cup. I just couldn't believe that St. Louis was participating in the boycott, not just like the nerds. It was everyone, clearly, because it would be like one or like probably 4 or 5 sections, like kind of empty. And then the rest of the stadium, that's what I expected. And so it is very rabid, right? The support for this boycott, the support for the Open Cup. I'm so proud of my city. I'm so proud to be a St. Louis soccer fan because of what's happened here. But I do believe that if we were in the Open Cup, give the Hooligans some respect because they would. I would. I mean, I care that much about the Open Cup, and I think the Hooligans do too. And it's because we've experienced it with St. Louis FC. We've experienced the magic of the Cup, and these groups, including myself, have like a massive respect for the history, and we feel like it's extremely important. It's been our namesake longer than St. Louis FC's been around, longer than St. Louis City's been around. So I do think it would still be around. To answer your question, I do think the boycott would happen, but I don't think the average fan would have jumped quite on board as much as they have already. So what do you think, though? Do you think I've seen a lot of people in the chat saying that it wouldn't have happened at all, no boycott at all.
Yeah, I've seen some people saying that on principle they still wouldn't have gone or attended, and it's tough to me hearing hearing Don Garber, it's almost like they're calling a bluff of sorts. Hearing the quotes about how they're looking to present a plan to U.S. Soccer that's orderly and makes sense. They're taking into consideration some teams came up and said they want to play. So I reiterate what we said earlier, that I think the realistic path forward is that they're going to not go back to 100% required participation, but they're going to have some kind of an opt-in volunteer basis and then go from there, which isn't truly any. It's a little bit better than it was this past year, in the sense that if you want to play, you can, but it still cuts the US Open Cup down at the knees, so to speak. Like, it's still not adding all first division teams like it was meant to do as a domestic cup. And so I just have a feeling that we're going to get into this scenario, and I'm not changing anything I'm doing now, because I still feel this was the appropriate path for this season. And without having known how St. Louis voted, that does play a pinch into it. I would have liked that confirmation as much as possible, regardless of I mean, you're having teams make statements that go against the league. So I think things were a little different time during that earlier this year. I would say that I wonder how far we're going to be taking this in the years to come, because Leagues Cup's not going anywhere. I don't think. I think that's a firm. They've planted the flag. They like how the flag is. They're going to plant a tree there because they like how things are growing, and they're going to keep going with the Leagues Cup. So now the question's going to be, where do we draw the line in the sand? Does it become, this is a one and done season of MLS really screwed up, and they screwed up in the messaging and the communication. They threw their teams under the bus. They threw the staff of the teams under the bus, because now they're having to play damage control and deal with these types of boycotts when they didn't have any say in the matter. That's this year. Are we going to go to a place where MLS allows opt-in, they allows volunteering, and you can really then take it to your individual team? Because I do feel bad a little bit about some days, a lot bit. I think about this all the time. Some days I feel really bad about the decision that we made, in the sense that we are not, I don't like not going to games that I could have had a ticket for. I don't like saying I'm opting out of my tickets on principle of something. I eventually feel I swing back and forth on the pendulum, where I do feel okay, but because of principle, and I know it's the right thing to do. And 2018 Matt would really respect me for this, but I struggle a lot knowing that we're not probably going to be posting match day graphics, that we're reducing. I'm probably not going to do a Fallout on Sunday. Like, we're reducing to that level, and it feels, it doesn't feel good. But I guess that's kind of what boycotts are supposed to do. They're not supposed to feel good. And I wonder what next year is going to look like, because this year, like I said, you write it off as, you can easily blame MLS and feel terrible about what you're doing, but know you're doing it for a greater good. And you're trying on some level to teach MLS a lesson, so to speak, if you get enough other groups, enough fan bases together. Because I've seen Philadelphia Union, Orlando City, I've seen Chicago, Austin. Austin was one of the leaders in this. The Crew supporter,
not Columbus.
The Crew supporter groups, the Nordec, they folded like the cards that they apparently are with and during our All-Star break hosting. What better time to make a statement than when you're hosting the All-Star game? And they didn't do it, but we have a lot of support around the league on the same concept that we're doing. And so the camaraderie is there. We talked earlier that we know the players understand. They're not, support goes too far to me, because I can't speak for the players, but I know there's an understanding of what's going on, and there will be an obvious excitement to have the fans back in full on the other side of this. But ultimately, I'm word salading this, next year, the year after, I think it gets to the point where, as long as the teams have a say, that gets us to more than what we are at this year. And it gets us to the point where we can put the onus on our teams, on our cities, to say, I don't like the top-down MLS decision, but if I knew that teams had a choice and I knew my team opted in, I can respect and support my team so much for that decision, because they're doing everything they can to, and I still will hate MLS for putting us on this path, but my team has done everything they can to play, and they're giving me a team in the US Open Cup. And if I didn't have a team that did that, you're damn right I would boycott.
Right. And I guess in a way, we're next year is going to parallel the question you asked, because, looks like if what we think is going to happen,
Yeah.
St. Louis will be in the Open Cup next year. Does that mean we stop caring? Does that mean we stop boycotting? Because it's like, we've all thought this through, but like, why? I said I was okay with that. But why am I okay with that? Are we, it's strange to me that the fans of MLS threw a big fit and said they don't like this. It's strange to me that there are several FIFA laws that MLS has decided to just ignore, and this
Yes.
being the most recent of them, but it's not the only one. It's strange to me that US soccer has ordered their children to eat their vegetables, and the rule is there, and the kid has said, okay, well, we're not going to eat our vegetables today, but like my brothers will. And then the parents like, well, you all are supposed to eat your vegetables. And MLS is like, well, we'll eat them when we feel like it. When each day we'll decide whether we want to eat our vegetables,
Yeah.
which means, like each club can decide. Why are we okay with that? Like it's a middle finger to the only soccer history we have in the United States. I just don't understand it. But at least again, it's the biggest thing that we need to take from this is it's why the crew thing, the Nordeca thing really bothered me,
Yeah.
because it's the fans are the only ones that are going to fix this problem. And to fold like that, I mean, the history that Columbus has on its own, like if someone was to compete with St. Louis for a soccer capital thing, like Columbus Crew have just as much or more, clout on that as Kansas City or Dallas, right? If you want to talk about first division soccer. So it's just like, I just can't believe they did that, because it just shows me, as much as I was surprised that the average St. Louis fans jumped on board with this boycott, I wasn't surprised that that's what happened with so many of the SGs in other cities, because that's how I figured it would go. I figured MLS would get their way, and fans would just buckle because they don't care enough. Who knows? But that's the only thing I like about letting each club choose, because we can shame them all, right? We can declare our soccer capitalness even more, right? And especially to Columbus, right? Like, they don't have a say. All we have to say to them is, you didn't even protest. You didn't even try to stay in the Open Cup. You have no soccer history. You just erased it all. You just put a middle finger up to all the soccer history by just not demanding to your league that we play in the Open Cup. I don't know what Kansas City supporters have done. Have they made a statement?
Nope.
Okay, so we get to hold that over their head too. Everyone, like, let's start rubbing that in on Twitter. And next year, that's how we're going to roll. We're going to roll like, if you're not part of the Open Cup, you don't get to take any pride away from soccer history in the United States, because you just decided you didn't care about it. So that's how I'm going to act next year. I'm going to be super petty, and I'm going to be super snobby about anyone not in it, if it goes to clubs deciding who's in and who's not. But should we stand for it though, Matt? What do you think? Should we continue to boycott Leagues Cup once that decision comes through, if it does?
I think it becomes a little untenable at that point, and I think you're going to get more and more pushback. I would like to say altruistically, yeah, we hold firm, and this is never a tournament that we're going to support as long as we don't have full participation in the Open Cup. But the moment it becomes a choice for teams, and you as a fan and as the ownership and as the front office can all say, we can't force MLS to make everybody participate, but we are choosing to play in this tournament that is historic, you're going to get 90% of the people back on board. And I get more on board to that mindset. And I don't have a clear line of where the boycott ends and the support begins in that arena. It becomes much more of a personal decision. I can still see some of the organized supporter groups probably backing out, maybe just continuing to back out, and that's a line that they draw. But I would see the overall boycott and the overall opting out of tickets much lower if City were choosing to be in, and they can hang their hat on the fact that they are choosing this.
I think it's a discussion we need to have immediately, right? I think all the supporters need to start talking about like the plan for next year, no matter what happens. Like, how far do we want to take this? Because I do think St. Louis is a bit of a leader in protest in, trying to push MLS to do soccer the right way.
But you never know. The resolve might be tested in a couple weeks. Like, we're sitting here recording this on July 25th before City's played a game in this tournament.
Yeah.
What happens if they go to the semifinals? What happens if they're fighting for a CONCACAF Champions Cup spot at the top 3 trophy? For us, for you especially, nothing. I would like to think myself nothing, but how many fans would immediately, and it's not a picket line, don't get me wrong with that. How many fans would at this point though say, okay, that's great, but we're fighting for a trophy here. Like, we're fighting. And at that point, like, are we never going to recognize Leagues Cup trophies? Like, these are conversations that I have a tough time reconciling even myself. And at some level, this is my stream of consciousness, because there's no clear, good answer to all of this when you're dealing with the ecosystem that is MLS. You're playing in their sandbox that they've purposefully muddied. And so you're now having to make concessions in every single way, which is just such an asinine thing to have to think about in sports. Like, this isn't the type of thing that you should have to worry about for sports, an escape to the team you love, the club you want to support, and the players that you want to support in all of the matches that they play. And now we're having to say, okay, but what if this? What if this? We drew a line here. Are we going to fall back on that? Are we going to stay strong? Are we going to recognize trophies? Are we going to recognize Champions Cup spots? Like, the next couple of weeks are going to be very interesting, and how, not just how City performs, but how the dialogue evolves. And I think that's what I'm most interested in seeing right now, before we get to the point where we're going to have those quick conversations about what are we going to do in 2025.
Mm-hmm. I agree. I mean, in my opinion, hold steady, right? We need to make the difference. There's, as rabid as German fans are about staying pure, the 51% rule, or 50+1 rule. Every year, DFB tries to do something that German fans don't like, and they have to stand up for it, like, with resolve.
Yes,
and they have to stick to their guns every single year, and they do, right? And so, to me, it's gonna have to become a yearly thing. And I think St. Louis fans I'm glad we brought it up, because I think this needs to be the conversation now, is that it needs to be a yearly resolve, and we can't back down. We need to be a shining light for soccer here in St. Louis. We need to be leaders. And who cares about the semifinal of the Leagues Cup? Who cares about the final? It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. We got to stick to our guns, because this is just one little problem in MLS. This is one tiny one. It's the most dramatic one for me personally. It's what I care the most about. But we really should be standing up about the roster problems you mentioned, Matt, and not being able to just bring in anyone we want from our 2 team. We should be upset about the ridiculous mechanics of, international slots and DPs, and not being able to open up the salaries to whoever we want. If we're going to spend our money, we should be able to spend it our way. We're going to fold on Open Cup. That means we're not even going to touch things like that in the future. We have a long way to go. And, saying we might go to a semifinal or a final because we finally did good this year, we're not looking at the big plan.
Mm-hmm.
We're thinking small, and we need to think big. We need to think it can't stop here. We got to go for the DPs. We got to be able to spend the money the way we want. We need to be able to bring up any player we want. We need to be able to use our academy from top to bottom. You know what I mean? We need to have a pathway so that we can use what we're good at, to fight the money spenders, that kind of stuff. It needs to happen. The league needs to be revolutionized. And St. Louis is in my opinion, I'm going to just go all in on pettiness and snobbery. We're the only ones demanding it. So
no, Greece has got you all fired up, and I like this, Phil.
It's that Greek democracy I've been hearing about. They're very proud of their democracy there in Greece. So
Fantastic. I think we've belabored the point.
yeah, absolutely. Thanks for listening. If you made it this far,
I will say that there is still a St. Louis City team playing in their regular season to support. So first away, City 2 plays North Texas on July 27th, and then on August 2nd, City 2 comes home to host Ventura County. That's the next home regular season game a City team will play. So get those cheap City 2 tickets, get to City Park for a regular season MLS Next Pro match, support the kids.
That's my plan. I'm really excited about the City 2 games. Honestly, yeah. I hope they get packed out.
Oh, I'm sure they will.
Yep. It's a good way to support your team when it's hard to not support them.
But yeah, if we're not back until next Thursday, we will have more of a look at City itself. So we talked about the new guys, some of the depth today. We're going to talk significant improvements that we want to see made and how that might have looked on the field against FC Dallas. We're not going to go into the specific stats and everything about FC Dallas because it's an LC match, but we will focus on St. Louis. We will focus on the St. Louis City players like we intend to do and hope that we continue to see progress building for the back third of the MLS regular season.
Thanks for joining us, everybody. Have a good one.